What is the value of pen testing? I get asked this question by companies trying to understand what is it and do they need it? Do they need to think about it? So, what is the value of pen testing? So, pen testing is short for penetration testing. You can also think of it as kind of an ethical hack concept. So, basically, pen testing is I'm going to hire someone to be a bad guy, but he's not going to be a bad guy because I hired him, and he's going to see what he can do, and he's going to see, or she is going to see what they can do to break into my network, or once they're inside my network, what kind of damage and destruction can they do. So basically it's the concept of, I want to know if my house is secure. Is my house secure? I don't know. Hire a burglar, right? If I hire a burglar to try to get into my house, hopefully he's legit, and he will tell me, yep, you had 3 windows unlocked and you forgot to lock the front door while you were sleeping one night, and I found this other thing back here that I could get through. I could cut your whatever lines. I mean, he's going to do that evaluation, right? And so go to the source, go to somebody who understands the bad guy's mind but is working for you. And so that's the idea of a pen test. It is if you do nothing else in your company, it is a great thing to do because it tells you what you do not know. So vulnerabilities are basically weaknesses in your system, either the external, the boundary coming in, or within your network, either way. And so a pen test is trying to exploit those vulnerabilities, exploit those weaknesses, just like the example I gave. Unlocked windows, forgot to lock my door, my, telephone line, not like anybody has phones in their house anymore, but my telephone line could be easily cut so you can't call the police. Those are vulnerabilities, right? And there's all sorts of tools and processes out there to help you identify those vulnerabilities. But just because a vulnerability is there doesn't necessarily mean it can be exploited, and it doesn't necessarily mean there's someone to exploit it, although you should assume that it can be exploited unless you know for certain you've done a technical analysis to understand it cannot be exploited, or and you should assume that people are going to try to exploit it, because it's much better to assume that it's going to happen to you and then it not happen to you than to do the opposite, because companies like to live in this, we laughingly call it the unicorn fantasy land, that it will never happen to me. I don't need to worry about cybersecurity. It will never happen to me. That's a terrible position to be in because you don't plan for it. You don't expect it. It's much better to not live in fear, not freak out, but to have a very clear mindset of, this really could happen to me. Would I be prepared? How would I handle this? Do I have appropriate measures in place? And then all that has to be tempered with, what can I afford? What are the people that I have that I can run? Do I need to hire someone to help me with this? Do I have internal staff that has this skill set? Do I even have revenue that would support these? And if I don't have that, well, what are some alternatives? And it's really just thinking through what that security posture overall would be. And so that is the mindset. So it's much better to assume it will happen to you and to prepare for it, than to just live in unicorn fantasy land that it will never happen to you and not be prepared at all. And then when it does happen, it kills businesses. When they operate out of that, it's really quite tragic, because all of their hard work is gone just in an instant, or they lose massive amounts of money, or whatever. The stories are all over the place, right? And so pen testing is a great way to basically say, okay, hit me, I'm here. How bad is it? Let me know what I'm really up against. And then it allows you to capture that. It allows you to remediate those findings. It allows you to really know where you are, not just, from hey, we're supposed to do this thing, so just go do it. But it's a mechanism to really help you identify those risks, and then be able to go through and how are you going to deal with them, and how are you going to remediate them, and what level of severity are they, and to really go through that kind of analysis process on it. A second part of pen testing is, how often should you do it? And so that's a great question too. Many of the security frameworks do either require pen testing, or they strongly encourage it. It's a risk identification mechanism. And so the frequency typically is going to be at least annually. But a lot of companies do it Quarterly, that's a pretty standard cadence, again, based on your budget, based on your risk. That's how you would know to set the timeline. It doesn't have to be done quarterly. That's not a requirement unless you have something specific in your industry or in your business that would require that, but it's at least annually. And then if you've never done one, go do one tomorrow. Go do one yesterday, because it really will give you insight about your business that you had no idea. Now, I say that, but if your business doesn't handle any data that you think is confidential, or maybe your pricing list, but I mean, come on, your pricing list, that sure, that is confidential, but is it catastrophic? If you're a company like that and you don't really have people's identities, so you're not affected by privacy, you don't really have regulated data, so health information, any of that, well, you know what, your risk is already lower as an organization. And so that changes the posture, right? So if you're one of those companies, don't bother. Do it if you have the resources. It's still a great thing to do. But recognize your risk is already lower, so anything it's going to find, if you're hacked, okay, what's going to be really the effect? The problem is if they steal money, or that will affect your business. If they steal data and that data is of value on the black market, like for example, credit card data, that's a problem. If they steal data, health information, that's a regulatory issue, and that will get you fined and written up the news just like that. So don't do that. So that's what you want to think about, even in choosing your cadence of the pen test. If I could just say like a black and white statement, every company should do a pen test, unless you really have nothing that you're that worried about from a data perspective. But pretty much every company should really look to doing a pen test. Now, there are different flavors of them. Of course, with everything, you can pay this. There are some tools that automate the mechanism of pen test. Then there are people who actually are hackers, and a lot of them are even certified, and some of them even come from the dark side that have now switched over to be an ethical hacker, and so they're very good at what they do, and those will cost you more. Obviously, they will give you better results depending on the person typically, but you can start small. You can start with a segment of your network. You can start with your website. You can start with a tool. There's some new AI tools coming out on the market to help, so there's lots of different ways to do it. The point is, be intentional. Think through what your risk is. Understand obviously your budget and your resources, and look for a solution that matches your risk and matches your budget, and then go do it, and go do it on a frequency that makes sense for your business, typically at least annually, but do it more if you have regulated data. Do it quarterly if you have highly confidential data, or PHI or PII, the health information, people's identities. Do it quarterly, do it monthly. Some companies, obviously with very large budgets, are going to more of this kind of continuous compliance. Well, if you can afford that, do that. But if you can't, start with something, and start moving the needle on your cybersecurity program and your awareness and your risk identification. That really is the key and the intent of what pen testing is there to achieve.